Most people injure their backs doing something as simple as picking up a pencil. Why? Now, the heart of this is rooted in an issue called creep. So, most structures in the spine are basically designed to prevent movement. This is because the spine's a somewhat paradoxical structure. It's a flexible rod with a guy wire system around it. It needs to be stable so as not to break, but it also needs to be capable of movement so that we could dodge something coming for us in a survival scenario, right? But on the point of it not breaking, most of those spine movements are a lot of load. That's how things start to get damaged and break. So most of the time we want to resist movement, and that's where these structures come in that do just that. Now, one such structure is something called a zygoapophyseal joint. Now, let's never use such an abomination of a word again and refer to it as a facet joint. Even if it's semi-inaccurate, it's close enough for our purposes. Now, the facet joint is part of the vertebra and it resists movement. Now, what it does is prevent shear. So shear is when a force moves in one direction and another force moves in the opposite direction. So the spine is just a series of vertebra disc stacked on top of one another in a bit of a weird S shape. Now, what happens when we have a shear force is there's a tendency for the vertebra to slip on top of another one. Very bad scenario, right? So these facet joints help prevent that, along with some other structures like the iliolumbar ligament, which interestingly actually isn't a ligament in children. It starts off as a muscle. But that's just an aside. The point is that these structures are designed to prevent movement. If we come back to that prior example, picking up a pencil, injuring your back, what the hell's happening there? It's such a innocuous, just relatively nothing movement. How is it getting injured? Well, essentially what's happened is we're stretching and breaking the collagen fiber bonds in the discs. Now, things just normally come back to normal, but there's a delay, and that delay is called creep. And that delay is called creep or set or hysteresis. It doesn't matter. The point is, it doesn't come back to normal instantly. Now, before it comes back, those bonds are sort of stretched, they're elongated. And in that position, if they don't fully just restore back to normal, if they grow new bonds there that are longer, now we have extra range of motion in the spine. And if we come back to that idea that most of the structures in the spine are designed to prevent motion, we have a very big problem. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, okay, but I've bent over in my life, I am not injured. If so, glad to hear it. Must be nice not to be injured, but in all seriousness, there's a good reason for that. So essentially, there's something called a fatigue failure. So if we do a repeated series of stress cycles, right? Let's say we forward bended, which would be a pretty high stress on the spine, and we just did it over and over and over again. We're not giving the discs, the vertebrae, a chance to recover, right? We're not doing one forward bend, going about our life, and letting everything come back to normal before we ever do it again. We're just doing it over and over and over again. It's basically just imagining a fatigue scenario, right? If you're at the gym, you're trying to bicep curl. If you do one bicep curl and then you come back 2 hours later, you can easily do a bicep curl. But if I ask you to do 100 of them, even with a relatively light weight, it's going to start getting hard. And at some point, you might actually reach failure. That's what's happening in the spine. And one really interesting way to sort of counter this, or at least to increase the speed with which we can get rid of set, is to lie supine with flexed legs. I have no idea why this works, but an author, Nikolai Bogdat, was very clear that it is helpful. If we're doing something like a forward bend, the back muscles, this guy wire system, is going to also try to resist motion. Again, everything is really centered around resisting motion, right? But because they're activated, they're also going to add a compression force to the discs. Now, this compression force, as I discussed in a previous video, especially in a forward bend, is really quite an issue because it's going to start forcing the little gel inside the disc out the back. So again, we're going to get this issue where we're damaging some sort of structure in the spine. In general, how do we get to a point where either we can tolerate this more or it doesn't become more of an issue? Well, I guess just obviously from how it's being described is we need to avoid repeated cycles of this movement, which is why someone like Dr. Stuart McGill would really advocate for core stability. And I guess the opposite side of this is why someone like Ben Patrick or knees over toes guy would advocate for likely slowly, I hope, trying to get to a point where we can strengthen these structures so that they're less susceptible to injury. My only fear in that is, I guess, a potential for growing some of those collagen fibers in a set position, because again, we're going to be less stable from that. So, look, I don't have a perfect answer for what we do there, how we actually avoid set, or how we just don't get injured from set. But it's definitely something that I'm seeking, and something that I will let anybody know once I do know. For those of you who don't know, I've been learning all of this as a part of my 50 Days to Rebuild challenge, where I read 50 pages of a physio book and do 50 minutes of exercise in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. Today we were reading The Clinical and Radiological Anatomy of the Lumbar Spine. How invigorating. If I just jump into the exercise portion of things really quickly. So recently I hurt my knee. I've been doing the bird dog as part of my core stability work, and it has also been aggravating my knee just because I've really injured it recently. But now it's still just cracking but not hurting, so love to see that. Definitely want this knee to be better. Now, I've tried a bunch of different things for my knee, and I think the overarching theme here is I've probably done a bit much. So I've tried to do like a bit of a split squat at like a 45-degree angle. This was sort of working my knee how I wanted it to, in the right area. It was feeling good. As well as lunges. These felt like they were activating my hips, getting my knees feeling good, getting that general connection to the ground better. But both of my knees are hurting now, where previously it was just one. So I think to me that's a pretty good indicator that I'm overloading things and probably need to back off a bit. And lastly, I've been doing these wrist movements. I was quite unsure about them in the previous episode, but they've been feeling good. The bird dog isn't hurting as much from having done them, so I think that's a really good sign. And yeah, that is about it for day 36. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.
Hi. Welcome to Bailey's video. Today we're going to talk about anatomy. Have you considered muscles?